Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody out to the October 7th, 2020 North Ogden Planning Commission meeting. I'm Chairman Thomas. I'll be conducting tonight. We'll begin our meeting by invocation of thought from Commissioner Waite, followed which being led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Nancaro. We'll go Commissioner Waite.
There we go. We got sound. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for blessing us with this opportunity that we have to live in this great land where we enjoy the freedoms that we do. We're thankful for the opportunity that we have to live in a land where the residents and all those who live here are able to voice their opinions and have a role in our governance. We ask you to bless us this night, that we will be guided, that all of our discourse will be civil, that we will be able to arrive at conclusions which will be best for the majority of the population and citizens here. And we thank thee for blessing us with this opportunity to live in this beautiful city, and bless us that we will know the things we need to do to preserve these things. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioners Waite and Nancaro. As far as roll call, I haven't seen, is everybody with us tonight?
Commissioner Arner asked to be excused.
Okay, that's right. So make note that Commissioner Arner is excused, all the rest are in attendance. Our minutes consideration and action to approve the September 16th, 2020 minutes. Any comments or corrections on those minutes?
No, I've reviewed those and I propose we approve those minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Any opposed approval? All right, we'll pass those. Our opening meeting statement now will be read. Rob, is that you?
It is.
Okay.
I'm going to explain the process that the Planning Commission will use in making decisions and the rules that govern the agenda items or hearings. The Planning Commission is interested in receiving public input and treating everyone fairly, that is, both interested parties and applicants. The Planning Commission is governed by Utah state law and the North Ogden City zoning and subdivision regulations. These codes contain criteria that the Planning Commission must follow in making its decisions. Before each agenda item begins, city staff will give a report. The report will identify whether the item is an administrative or legislative item and list the criteria that govern the city's decision. After the staff report, the applicant will speak first. If the city is the applicant, the staff report will present the applicant's case. Following the applicant, audience participants will be recognized by raising a hand through the chat feature to make comments or ask questions. The applicant has final rebuttal time. Applicants or their agents will be allowed up to 10 minutes for their initial presentation and 5 minutes for rebuttal time. Persons speaking for a committee and or board will be given 5 minutes. All other individuals will be entitled to 3 minutes. Prior to speaking, anyone who needs more time to present evidence must ask for more time. Any information, argument, or evidence you give must relate to the criteria listed in the staff report or other criteria in the general plan or land use regulations that you believe apply to the decision. Any materials that are displayed or referenced, for example, pictures or written materials, are part of the record and must be sent to the commission. Anyone wishing to speak should raise their hand on the chat button. You'll be recognized by the chair and be allowed to speak. The Planning Commission has adopted rules regarding outside contacts, otherwise known as ex parte communications. Commissioners are not to engage in communications outside of the public meeting regarding administrative applications. If you desire to speak to commissioners on these matters, it should be done at a regular meeting so your comments, concerns, and evidence are on the public record. And finally, as a courtesy to persons in this meeting, please mute your speaker until you are recognized to speak. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. Item 4, ex parte communications or conflicts of interest. Any commissioners have ex parte communications or any conflicts on tonight's agenda?
I have nothing on tonight's agenda. I was approached by a real estate agent whom I know outside of this. Went to elementary school with him, and he asked me if he put in an application on some land up on the side of the hill, if it could be rezoned outside of the HP zone. And I just encouraged him to come to put an application or attend a meeting and bring that before us, as I wasn't comfortable discussing that. I had my thoughts on it, but I just encouraged him to attend the meeting. So we amicably agreed that that's what he would do.
All right, anything else? If not, let's go to item 6, our public comments for items not on the agenda. If any members of the public would like to speak to the Planning Commission, again, on an item that is not on the agenda, please raise your hand or type in the chat at this time.
I don't see any hands, Eric.
Okay. Well, let's move on to our consent agenda. Item 6, a discussion and an action regarding the opening meeting statement and decision statements. I think this is just where we've kind of narrowed them down a little bit. Do we have any discussion on that?
I read through those before the meeting, and I'm willing to accept all the changes that were in there. Thought they were great.
Okay.
Nothing stood out to me as I didn't catch anything that I wanted changed, at least.
So I have one suggestion for you to think about, and that is we generally, at the end of the meeting, when we're actually meeting, we ask people to turn off their cell phones. In this case, we ask for the folks to mute their speakers. I would think that might be an addition you might want to include. And then the other comment was with respect to how important is it to express a thought about ex parte contacts. You already have that on your agenda, and you can explain that as part of that. So I just throw that out as to something you might want to consider as well.
Okay. Well, if everybody's good with this or with the needed changes, entertain a motion for acceptance.
So Eric, do you want it read each meeting, or do you want it printed on the agenda? You kind of need to decide what you want to do there.
Okay. What's commissioners' thoughts?
Well, I thought today, what Rob read today was concise, brief, to the point. I liked the part about silencing your mic on the Zoom meeting. Oh, excuse me. Of all the times to sneeze when I'm not muted. Excuse me. Anyway, I'm okay with leaving it spoken. Is there anybody that feels differently? It takes up 30 seconds.
Go ahead, Don.
I think the spoken part, I honestly don't think a lot of people are going to read it on the agenda. If it's printed, it's probably just wasting ink. But then again, there's a lot of people that I don't know that they really listen while we're reading the opening meeting statement too.
Well, I was thinking it would be both places, meaning it would be on the agenda for people who want to go online and see it, and then it's read briefly like that. Is that overkill?
as long as we're doing the Zoom, we're not wasting ink, but when we start meeting together, you may have somebody show up late that won't get a copy, won't be there to hear it. But they'll at least be able to look in the back, oh, here's how this works. But I think both ways is important.
So one of the things that we have done is we have a link to our frequently asked questions. And we have included the policies relative, so that's a place where people can go, and potentially we could also put a link in our notices that we send out that might help people as well. We could, as a staff, we could take a look at those kinds of things and see if we can't be a little more visible as far as those kinds of things.
I think printing them on the notices, that would be really good. Because those are people that are more than, more likely than just average people to attend the meeting. And I guess it'd be good for them to have some idea what was going to happen.
So some of you probably don't remember this, but others might. We have actually put together some policies about how to go about addressing the planning commission and so forth. So this type of thing can easily be incorporated or actually be a separate link with that. So either one.
Okay. And I think the opening statement, as we read it, digitally, it's easy to attach to the agenda. If we start printing our agendas out when we meet in person again, if we still just keep everything on a single page, it's just on the back, that's probably fine. I'm probably more apt to the administrative and legislative decisions, probably not needing to read that in the meeting and just have that posted. Again, oftentimes, is that it gives people a clue, but it seems like anyway, most of the applicants have been here before or should know the process. And if the applicant needs to know, they should be aware of that prior to them seeing us. Again, that's something I feel like probably doesn't need to be read and can just be printed on the agenda or whatever, so people participating can see the process if they're so interested.
So I'm a little bit, want to make sure I'm clear on this. You're talking about the paragraph that either identifies it as an administrative or legislative decision. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. Oftentimes, Brandon or whomever, when we start, like if it's the first legislative or first administrative, always tends to read the process to us to, what that is. And that's probably just something I think we don't need to have read at each meeting. That can just be printed.
Yeah, we'll continue. I would recommend we continue to make sure that's in the staff report.
So, Chair, I just, I want to make sure I'm clear. So first, we talked about like it was a good thing that Rob read it right at the beginning, just once, like he just did. But you're saying maybe don't read that part at all?
No, the opening meeting statement is fine to read, but if you remember, and oftentimes it seems like it's Brandon as the one, when we get to an agenda item that's administrative,
Right.
they'll start with, being this is the first administrative item, I'm going to read the process for an administrative item, and then the same with legislative. So it's separate from the opening meeting statement, kind of telling the public our procedure of how we're doing things or how they can participate, and then the administrative decision process and legislative that seems like that's read to us is, pertaining to how we conduct business on each of those items.
Right. Rather than just, I'm okay with just like the one statement in the beginning. As
Yeah.
part of the opening meeting statement, and then printing it. I think that's a good idea to print it. And also, I think it's a good idea. I agree with adding the on the Zoom version to mute your speakers or silence your mic or whatever the right terminology is.
Okay. Sounds like the makings of a motion, Commissioner Nancaro.
I make a motion that we adopt these changes in this language with the addition of adding instructions to mute this under the Zoom instruction portion to for the participants to mute their speakers. And that this would be included in the opening meeting statement and not included in each individual agenda item. And also to be printed or published in the written agenda. I think I covered it.
Okay,
I'll second that.
motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay,
So I have one question that now that you've shortened that up, I'm wondering if the chair to expedite things instead of turning time over to me, if the chair should just read it.
that's fine. That works easy too. So we'll try that in the next meeting. And if I stutter too much, then we'll turn it back to you.
So at some point in time, well, if I really get bad, we're going to let Lynn do it. But anyway, I think we're on the right track here. I don't have any problem with, modifying or shortening these things up, make them a little more brief. There's no problem with that.
Okay. Good. Well, let's move on to our administrative item tonight, item number 7, site plan review 2020-8, consideration and action regarding site plan approval of the DML campus located at 2650 North, 300 East. And Kai is our presenter.
Good evening, Chair and Commission. I will forgo the type of decision statement. This, as previously mentioned, this is an administrative decision. Can we scroll down on the staff report, please? Thank you. So this is the DML campus. Some of you may know it more familiar as the Northern Ice. It's directly behind Lee's Marketplace. So this site plan review is kind of being brought on by the addition of a freezer at the Northern Ice site. I'm unaware if they've underwent site plan approval for the addition of the Northern Ice building, but because they're adding that freezer, that's what's triggering this site plan approval tonight. So they've provided a site plan that shows the overall site with the addition of the Northern Ice building and the proposed addition of the freezer. Lynn, would you pull that exhibit up, the site plan, exhibit B, please?
This was like a game of I Spy, by the way. I was looking at both of those for like 5 minutes before I found the difference.
Okay, so yeah, you can see here the Northern Ice building there is there in gray, and then the proposed freezer is in white, just to the south of the Northern Ice building. This shows all the parking as well as the future phase 3 building that is yet to be completed, as well as the landscaping and things of that nature. As part of this site plan approval, they are proposing some signage. It's a little unclear in the code how it's defined because they're defining it as a photo backdrop. But if we can go to exhibit, what is the next one? C. If we can zoom in there. Oh, up, Lynn, please.
Is that it?
No, exhibit C, the page with the page 18. Yeah, we could zoom in there on the building elevation. So this doesn't exactly represent the color, but it does show the Northern Ice. I'm assuming it's a vinyl decal. This is not as well defined in the code, so there's an issue on the definition of the sign as well as providing a comprehensive site plan. And there will need to be, as part of they will need a sign permit. See what else was I going to mention. if we could pull up the street view and the rear view, Lynn, 19 and 20.
What's the discussion on the sign there, Kai? Is it just the fact that the sign is on the structure, the freezer structure that will be built? It looks great in when I'm looking at it.
There's questions about what the type of sign it is, as well as if they meet the requirements. Because if you look, they have the sign on top of the building. They may be over the minimum or the maximum sign area. They may exceed that. This is the rear view. This in the exhibit C. This is kind of the rear view. This is behind the Lees. There's trash enclosures and there's 2 semi-trailers. You can see them parked here. This is part of the reasoning is that this structure is going to kind of screen that courtyard in the northern ice from the rear of Lee's, the dumpsters and the loading docks and things of that nature. So the sign is really the only major issue. I provided the street view and the rear view. Do you have any other questions for me?
Have they given you a proposed material at all on that? The diagrams I'm looking at and the size of it, I'm wondering, is it a 20-foot shipping container?
No, it is freezer panels. It'll be similar to the structure.
Okay. Just the one drawing that shows the sign, it looks awfully familiar to like a shipping container, but so long, because we don't allow those, so, or whatever has to be done with that. So
Right.
That was my only question.
Yeah, they did provide an example of kind of what they're doing. It's going to be similar to Arby's as well. We didn't get that exhibit attached, but it's similar to the one behind Arby's, if you're familiar with that.
Okay. Okay, I have no further questions. Does anybody else have any questions? I would assume, for us, it's the site plan approval. The square footage of signage that's allowed is simply a calculation that staff can do. I don't think that matters, for us, that it either falls within it or whatever falls within they're allowed. Correct?
Mhm.
I mean, what if the proposal is it's painted right on the side of the building? That's not a sign, right? So I guess I think we're going to hear from the applicant. He's got his hand up.
Okay.
But I agreed. I mean, that's math, right? We can't do anything about the math. If the sign exceeds the ratio, then it does.
Yeah. So one can be a menu board, then it's not a sign.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's sort of unfortunate because I think the little house with the big sign on top actually looks pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I don't have any questions for Kai.
Okay. Well, it sounds like probably for us then, any questions with commissioners before we turn it over to the applicant? Let's go. Lynn, if you go ahead and have the applicant on and he can explain some things to us.
Okay, Dave, go ahead.
Thank you for taking the call. Kai and Rob, thank you for putting that together. The material proposed is
So we need your name and address. Sorry to cut you off there, but before you get going.
Yes, David Gordon, 1334 East, 2650 North, North Ogden, Utah. I assume that's all that we need on the preliminary.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So the sign material will be an aluminum plate, rounded on the edge and printed on it. Printing's quite easily, obviously, from Quality Quick Print there. And then it would be attached there. The goal of that is to give a backdrop so that people can come and get photos. The bear feature, the gazebo, we're finding a lot of people want to have pictures. We thought it'd be nice that instead of having the corrugated metal in the background, just to put a nice sign with our logo on it, with a bear, things like that, to kind of define that area for some photos. And then the landscaping would blend that in for an area below the signage area. So it'd be attached right to the corrugated metal of the structure add-on. As far as the material in the proposal I submitted, I showed pictures of how Arby's has corrugated roof, corrugated sides. I wanted to match a corrugated look because of obviously cost features, but it would be more like the one at Kirk's Drive-In behind theirs. So it'd be the deep corrugated side, and then it would be painted and with the trim, flat top, all the electronic, their HVAC stuff would be on the side between the bushes and the actual structure.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Does any of the other commissioners?
Mr. Gordon, are you proposing that if the sign doesn't meet your sign ordinance, our sign ordinance, that you would push for the fact that this isn't a sign, it's a decorative feature?
It is a decorative feature because we have the huge sign right on top. There really doesn't need to be more advertising signage. Again, the goal is to make it a pleasant backdrop for photos instead of just having a plain painted corrugated metal side.
So the sign in conjunction with the monument of the bears and stuff creates an atmosphere, and it's not an advertising sign, right?
Correct.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? All right, any discussion on the planning commission side? I don't view that as a sign myself because it's not pointed at any advertising area, you know, a roadway or any of that stuff. It truly is kind of a feature that's within its own courtyard. That's, you know, like a landscaping feature, a backdrop for people to take pictures. In my opinion, I don't view that as, oh, that's additional signage because it's not pointing anywhere other than within its own courtyard.
I agree. It's also not its own structure. I mean, you know, a sign to me, when we define them as such, you know, a monument sign or a sign with the pillars, you know, they have posts and stuff. This is a print on the side of a building, and I'm in agreement with the applicant that it, you know, it creates that feeling of place. I commend him for the, you know, it's a well manicured lawn. We're going to have some little monument out there of bears, and I'm seeing the vision, and I'm willing to not call this a sign.
Okay, other than that, any other discussion?
I make a motion that we approve the DML campus site plan with the conditions identified in the staff report.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
One
Let's
clarification,
see.
do we want to make anything in the motion that addresses the sign? And I just don't want the staff's hands to be tied if they go and try to figure that math out and then say, oh no, the sign doesn't meet the ordinance. Do we want to have something in the ordinance that defines this as not a sign, or in the motion that clarifies this is not a sign? Is that important?
You know, since we haven't actually seen what he wants to put on the side of there, do we have to put anything in there at this point in time? Do you think that's beneficial?
I think it would be beneficial to mention that the decorative features on the side of the freezer that face the courtyard, even if it says the name of the business, we wouldn't consider it signage as long as it's facing in that courtyard. And then that probably covers it where we haven't seen it. Then I think that would probably be sufficient.
Okay. Do I need to repeat that, or can I just say?
I think if you just include it,
Okay.
amend the motion to include that,
Yeah.
I think you're fine.
Yeah, if I could amend the motion to include what Chairman Thomas just laid out about the decorative sign, the decorative art on the side of the building.
I'll second the amendment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All right, we'll put to vote. Commissioner Waite,
Yes.
Commissioner Nancaro,
Yes.
Commissioner Mason, Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes,
Commissioner Mason.
Yes, again.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you the first time.
Did it not come through?
It
I
must
can be
not.
louder.
You didn't get off that mute quite quick enough. All right, and I vote yes. Okay, we'll move on. Oh, man, now I got to go all the way back to the top. Sorry. Okay, we'll move on to our legislative items. Item number 8, Zone Text Amendment 2020-6. Discussion regarding proposed revising of the standards for block lengths and connectivity. Rob?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. You'll recall back, when was it? Back in June, we had a discussion regarding the Pheasant Landing subdivision and whether or not we should require a mid-block connection. And later after that, we also had a further discussion about the significance of connectivity and coming up with better standards that address when connections need to be made. So as you know, we are working with our consultants to come up with a revised land use code. And as part of that land use code, we've been sharing with our consultants various aspects of various topics, and this is one of them. So I've been doing some research relative to this particular topic, and I'm not prepared to share with you a draft ordinance, but what I would like to do tonight is just discuss with you some basic principles that I feel are worthy of discussion. So Lynn, if you could go down to the orange, I guess it's orange or red, whatever.
On that, Rob, as you're not ready to do an ordinance yet, but what we've talked about doing, but do you have in there kind of what changes from the existing or what we currently have that I guess whether we need to discuss, is this something that we need to go to that extent on, or?
What my anticipation is that if the commission would like to entertain these basic things, then previously I did give you the existing standards, and what I will need to do is to meld this in with the existing ordinance. So I would be bringing that back to you if you feel like these are the appropriate principles that we want to include as standards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. There's just some of this stuff. I guess we can just go through it and then discuss it with as the commission then.
Sure. So if we can just go up to the bottom of page 1, Lynn, yeah, there we go. Can you blow that up just a little bit so maybe people can see it? Hopefully okay. So the first principle, there's 3 basic principles that staff is recommending that you consider. The first one is we have a discussion, we've had many discussions about this term, circulation and connectivity, and yet in the ordinances, it really doesn't utilize or use those terms. So one of the things that we felt it would be appropriate to do would be to actually create a section that addresses those topics so that when individuals are looking to design a project, that they recognize that they need to address those specific things. So the first one is addressing this idea that there should be standards with respect to how our street system should be laid out, and that as a part of that, circulation design and connectivity are a part of it. So I don't need to read these things, but if you read those first two introductions, I don't know if anybody had any concerns about those or not. So maybe just scroll down and go to page 2, where it talks about street arrangement and suitability. As part of the review of the overall layout of subdivisions and what have you, it's important to take a look at how does it fit in with city policy as well as surrounding development. So the first principle is that we have a transportation plan, and if there's a street that is involved, so typically it's our collector and arterial streets that this are impacted by number 1. So the second one has to do with the significance of land uses and how those designs fit together. So an example of that would be when we talk about, we have standards in our ordinance that talk about frontage, and especially on arterial and collector streets, the way that those should be laid out. And staff has a feeling that those things should be fronting as opposed to back facing lots. That's just one example. Number 3, efficient, safe, and convenient vehicular and pedestrian circulation. So how does it relate to connecting with existing layouts? 4th is topography. That's definitely an important part of it. And are there any specific management standards that apply to the site? So these are generally unique circumstances where we would want to make sure that our basic standards or the state standards where we're dealing with state roads are addressed there as well. And the third principle has to do with.
Hi, I am new.
Yeah, did you get that from the library?
So street connectivity and the formation of blocks is required. And so it gives some guiding principles here that basically says you need to follow our transportation plan, the public works standards, and you need to look at adjoining developments to make sure that appropriate access is provided. These are things that we do now, but this is really the first time where we brought those principles together. Talks about connecting the streets so that they line out. Proposed streets or street extensions shall be located to provide direct access. And it has a recognition that sometimes we're dealing with activity centers or schools or office parks. Those kinds of things may create some unique circumstances for connections and design. And then lastly, it talks about how it needs to maintain its function. So each of our streets, we have them divided into local, collector, and arterial. So we look at the function of the street type and see how those are going to fit together. So those are the basic standards that we feel are appropriate to incorporate in some form or fashion with respect to street connectivity and circulation. So that's the first segment.
Can I comment on that? Are you looking for comment at this time, or do you want to?
I think let's discuss it as we go through it rather than wait at the end, so we at least can talk about the topics as we hit them. Will that work, Rob?
Of course.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mason.
So I've struggled with this principle ever since we put a bisecting road onto Mountain Road a few years ago. And I understand block lengths and that we need to have standards, and when we have those standards that they need to be enforced. I understand that, but I feel like there's some certain kind of roads that just require an exception to that. And I thought Mountain Road was a notable exception. And I think to a development, not a development, many of you have probably been to Henderson, Nevada, and Henderson, Nevada is not North Ogden. It's way, way bigger. Okay. But they have these parkways. So they have lots and lots of dense development with little micro blocks, and you get to these things by these giant parkways that where you may drive for a mile or more between any kind of a connecting road, and it's efficient because it's for traffic to fly down. Now there's no homes that front the parkways, obviously, so you don't have driveways and stuff like that to contend with. But a standard like that just wouldn't fit. And so I'm thinking of the future of North Ogden, and I think one day there may be a mountain road, there likely will be, that kind of comes around and bends all around the top. And do we really want to enforce that there's a bisecting road or a block on that mountain road, or could there be sections of a half mile, a mile, where it's just for vehicular movement, right? And so I wonder if we, in addition to, you put maximum block lengths in by zone, but I wonder if there shouldn't be some kind of a flexibility for road type or the purpose of the street, not the purpose of the development. Because even if that street goes through a residential area, it could be like a parkway. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Anthem Parkway in Henderson. I don't know if that's ringing a bell to anyone.
I haven't, but I couldn't agree with you more, Brandon. That was the thing that stood out with me on this is, I think if I remember right, our current maximum block length is 1,300 feet, but I didn't have time to look at what existing is. Rob, if you know, maybe you could speak up, but in some instances we might think that's a little bit long, but in other instances, I think that works. I look at this 600 feet and think, especially how North Ogden would develop out sometimes on the hillside, that if we're trying to maintain that everywhere, sometimes I feel like that's going to start creating some steep connecting streets between blocks and things on a hillside. But also to Commissioner Mason's point is, I wouldn't want to see a road every 600 feet intersecting Mountain Road as, any of our collector or arterial streets, help with the idea of helping traffic flow on those streets rather than slow it down with all the intersections. And I don't say slow it down, meaning I think those streets should be high-speed traffic. I just think the flow. Yeah. And you look at some of the subdivisions that have been developed in the city. I briefly tried to look at just some of them on Google and see, Lakeview Heights, which was developed, some 35 years ago. There's a lot of streets in there that go up and down their parks or around that area that's got tennis courts that there's much more distance than 600 feet between their blocks, but those streets have a sense of community, a different design with it rather than just a cut and dry square block. The Cove subdivision is probably more recent, and some of the streets up in there, as they go from top to bottom, the middle street, for example, doesn't connect to either side streets of the three, and it's much longer than 600 feet. Part of it is the curve to it to accommodate the slope that's on the hillside, but also it gives it that character that has those little cul-de-sac things that come off of it, but the main road itself. So there's some good and some bad where people through the development think, I got to drive all the way around to get somewhere because the things aren't completed yet. But also it gives it a sense of uniqueness, I feel like, with design characteristics that I worry that 600 feet would then start limiting the ability to make some design characteristics in development. So
if you look at, that's the next section, which talks about block lengths. And you asked us to put together some standards that relate to residential zones versus commercial and neighborhood commercial. And when you get down to the top of page 3, what we have identified is a couple of principles. One is that block lengths can be extended based on certain criteria. And we've identified some of those things like topography as it relates to either state highways, or there's some kind of a natural feature that would prohibit that. If there's a some type of a school or large institution, that would certainly qualify. If there's something that has to do with outdoor facilities like parks and so forth. So the idea is that it's not a one size fits all, but by the same token, where it's feasible to be able to have appropriate connectivity, then those are the kinds of things that we feel are appropriate. So that brings me to the next thing, and that is that when we do have a situation like that, then we now have some standards that talk about that at those mid-block areas, you don't necessarily have to put in a complete street. In other words, one that meets our 60-foot right-of-way, but we allow for either pedestrian access ways or a modified public access easement that would accommodate a modified street design to be able to provide access between those particular projects. So I'm going to get to that here in just a second, but let me draw your attention to number E, minimum distance between intersections. We currently have a standard of 400 feet, which I think everybody, including our city engineer, I think Lauren's on here, he can speak for himself, but as we've talked about it, that just seems a bit excessive. A more reasonable standard is a 200 foot separation between intersections.
You're saying intersections can't be closer than 200 feet to each other, or are you saying every 200 feet needs to be an intersection?
It can't be any closer than 200 feet.
Okay.
So our current standard is 400 feet. And I don't think that we've enforced that in many years. So that's why we're suggesting that that be a much more reasonable standard to work with.
And I guess an example of that, maybe, I mean, it comes to my mind, I probably understand that, but maybe is for other commissioners is maybe thinking of more of a offsetting intersection. You know, you might have one street on the south side of a road and it doesn't intersect in a four-way, you know. So a good example of this would be 2 3-way intersections can't be closer than 200 feet to each other. So it's not necessarily thinking 2 4-way intersections are going to be right by each other, but more so of you might be accessing a street on the south side. Mountain Road tends to be a good example. And then the next street on the right, you know, on the uphill side might be 200 feet down the road. So
and
that's most likely where some of those come into play is 3-way intersections offsetting each other, you know, getting close together because a 4-way intersection doesn't work or it doesn't line up because of its, you know, one road's been there for 100 years and it doesn't line up across the street because there's a house there as the property develops.
So I've also given some latitude with the last phrase, and that is given existing circumstances and that we have made a provision in here that our city engineer can make a determination that, hey, if it's just not practical, then that 200 feet won't necessarily be adhered to. So the last or the third component of this is talking about mid-block access. So I'm sort of intrigued by this idea that when we have these fairly long blocks and what have you, that there's an alternative to actually providing a complete street right-of-way at these intersecting areas. So one option is, and I think we've sure had a lot of resistance from people wanting to have pedestrian walkways and what have you. And I understand why those are a concern. That's why I kind of like this idea of establishing a public access easement that would allow for basically a 20-foot wide vehicular strip. It has some raised curb, possibly has a a curb and maybe a walking trail or a sidewalk, a modified one. So that seems to me is something that actually puts us in a position to say, here, design it this way. You've got long blocks and what have you. But we are going to require that you have some sort of a mid-block access between these long blocks. So that's one option. I also have given the option of providing access ways that are for foot traffic. And so either or, I guess my preference is I like the idea of the 20-foot wide. It looks like a street, and instead of worrying about, okay, who's gonna maintain it? How's it gonna be taken care of? What's going on there? All of those things.
Okay. Well, I think my opinion is, the access ways as far as pedestrian walkways at the dead ends, somewhere in here it's saying something about at the ends of cul-de-sacs. For sure, I wouldn't, everywhere we've tried, where somebody's asked a developer to try and put a sidewalk in, between lots, not only has that been something they didn't want to do, but none of the people that live on the either side around that sidewalk want it either. So in my opinion, there shouldn't be an avenue to where we force somebody's hand. If a developer wants to do that, yes, but I by no means feel like that's something that we should go in there and say it's a requirement. I've expressed it 100 times in the last meetings. I'm opposed to those just for the other things that happen with that. You just have a pedestrian alleyway between people's yards that interfere with their backyards. And it just, I don't like the idea of them anywhere at all. So
the one exception to that, we've had that discussion about where we have our trail system. And we've had near Commissioner Nancaro's, remember we asked for the developer to make a connection where we had I've forgotten what the distance was, but it was a considerable distance between access points. And we simply wanted a better access at the midpoint to be able to do that. So I'm thinking that at some point we need to have a standard that at least accentuates our trail system. And to me, that's the one where I would suggest that that's where you should stand fast.
Yeah, if I remember, I can't remember. I know in one instance it was, being proposed as part of the trail system to connect to the trail along the canal, but through a cul-de-sac that was right there. But in a matter of 3 lots away was the canal across the street. And so it in that instance, one that I remember over there off of, I can't remember, on the north side of, what was it, Oakmont or Paramount subdivision or something. And so that it didn't, it shortened it for 4 people in a cul-de-sac. Other than that, it was closer to go onto the street. But so I agree. There may be some instances where a trail, if it's part of the trail system, but through the design of a subdivision, they should be incorporating how to get the trail from one side to another as part of our trails system. And the developer should be, working a way to make that work. So,
I know this has come up more than once, but, I like the thought that if it is appropriate, because our trail system is pretty cool in our city, and I think it's a big feature, and it's a shame, to cut access to that off because a developer wants one more lot, or they don't want to, but we have no teeth to enforce it at this point. And I think something like this access way routing is a great idea that, maybe we don't want to enforce it in every case, but that if there is a case where we feel that it's appropriate, it would be nice to have something in the ordinance where we could require it.
I agree with you. I'm in full support of having that access way, even if it goes through 2 lots, if it's part of the trail system. What I'm opposed to is just because 2 streets are 800 feet long and then just to connect 2 streets together mid-block. That is what or the back of a cul-de-sac to another block. I'm opposed to that. If it's part of the trail system, extending the trail system, connecting the trail system, I'm in favor of working ways to make that happen. Just not because I guess, and maybe it's me going around, is I just don't see people saying, oh, I need to get to the block over there so quickly. I'm not going to, one kid lives on one street and he wants to go through the neighbor's yard to get to the other side. So because the block's 800 feet long, we're going to say that they have to put a sidewalk in the middle of it. I don't, that's the part where I don't see the advantage of it. But
Can you see any other instance other than connection to a trail? Because I could see that there might be other reasons.
well,
Although I couldn't tell you what they are at this moment.
in my opinion, that's where it's like, we don't know, so it's, if there's something mentioning saying, oh, to the trail, but for us to go in and say, we can't think of instances where it would be needed. So why should we make an ordinance saying that's required?
I'm just thinking, okay, what if there is an elementary school there, on the next block, and then the developer comes and develops this huge thing, and we want them to put some kind of an access way through there. Could we require that without something like this in the ordinance? I'm hesitant to just say only in the case of a trail access, because there could be other reasons. Maybe there's a park.
I guess in my mind, when we're talking trail system, in my head, I'm thinking, well, your trail is going to access, a park, a school, or, some kind of public infrastructure, that would be considered that, I guess.
Yes, but right now we have a trail plan under, the Parks and Recs Department, and it overlays the city. And we use that as sort of our teeth to say it's part of this trails plan. But there could be instances where it deviates from that trails plan, like you say a park or a, school or something is, in close proximity, that it would make sense to have some sort of access way through there. It would be nice to have some language that would give us, I guess, some authority to require it.
Yeah, it's a matter of probably in design. I think there's an access sidewalk to the back of Bates Elementary. And I swear half the kids that go to that school get dropped off or picked up right there, which may be a convenience for the people going to the school and that, but it's probably a nuisance for the people who live right there on that street. And I see the underlying thing of saying, was that intended for drop off and pickup? I think the trail there originally was more, let's connect this school to the city park that's just on the other side of that street and make everything accessible. But so on one side, yes, you see a benefit, but also you can see the negative effect of it as well. And, I think it's great to help access the school there, but the people who probably live on that street probably think differently. But I guess I can see some of those things, you bring up some good points and see it's, what do we need to have in here as requirement? I feel like what we have already has functioned well. If the city asks for it, it seems, but again, like you said, where do we put something in there that gives us teeth to maybe require something, but yet it's not just a blanket requirement every time a road is 400 feet, and maybe that's all it is saying, hey, where possible, we want mid-block, or access points to our public, schools, parks, and trail system. And that gives us enough that in there that if we feel it's required, we can, because it's been mentioned, but yet it's not just a flat, because there may be instances where our ordinance says, hey, it's required to put a mid-block access to a school, and a project comes through and we say, hey, we don't want that access there because the access point is, maybe it's 3100 or it's an arterial road that we kind of don't want to get kids walking on. So we don't want it there, but by ordinance, it would be required. So it probably is something that needs to have some leeway, gives us teeth, but also gives us the ability to not have it if we see it puts a negative impact on a situation.
The only thing I worry about that flexibility is every time there's the flexibility, the developers ask for it to not go in and we don't end up requiring it. And so I think the whole point of this discussion is let's decide when it's necessary now and eliminate whenever there's flexibility, it ends up meaning it's not going in. And that might be because our requirements are too. So if we loosen the standards but increase the requirement to be a mandatory, then I think that's healthier for the developers and the city, because we won't end up always getting everyone to ask for an exception to the rule.
I think this is a tough one because I see the 600 feet between, breaking up the block. And if that's a road, if we're going a 60-foot road every 600 feet, we're going to be paving most of the city over. And we've had, a number of discussions about affordability, but if we're putting too many streets in, we've got runoff issues. We've got just the cost of the building lots and developments is going to go through the roof. 600 feet, that's somewhere between 4 and 6 building houses on a street. And if we're just putting in an access way, you could say that's sufficient. You don't have to put a full street in. But yeah, like Eric says, we've just had nothing but complaints every time we've tried to put in access ways. When it comes, the topic always comes up: who's going to maintain it? And it comes back to the property owner. So now we're forcing property owners to maintain trails that they don't want, that upset the privacy in their backyards. I think it's really important we have access to the trails, trail schools, parks. It's a tough one.
So commissioners, let me give you an example. When you look at a block that is 600 square feet, 600 by 600, et cetera, that's a 10-acre block. So it really is a sizable area that we're talking about here.
Well, yes, assuming that you just went 600 by 600, but I think where it really comes into play is if you do a typical lot development breakdown, that you might have lots front to back with each other, so that distance in the block is you're always going to have, more of rectangular shaped blocks than square.
Yeah, where there's a central area. The only you could be putting in a park or a plaza, or the lots are going to be crazy deep.
But I think it's probably the block length, requirements is probably more so than just saying residential, commercial, etc. Because, if you have a R4 or an R8 zone, maybe that makes more sense where you have more density, more houses, that you have more. And then the larger areas where it's larger lots, you have longer streets. We have 400 acres of developable ground up on the hillside that's HP3. Do you want 600-foot block lengths on 3-acre lots? That doesn't make sense.
So that's a house per block.
So then you really look at it and say, well, maybe that needs to be broke down by zone. I think it could be probably broke down by zone and road type, where we have arterial and commuter roads that, I'm with Commissioner Mason, that should have less connection to, just to help the flow of the city. One day when we get Monroe built through there, unfortunately, because the city's all built around it already, it's going to have connecting blocks every 300 feet. And, which just, which none of it can be, Monroe can be straight through with only stop signs on the intersections, but it just creates those restriction of flow, in my opinion. So.
Well, and I think this conversation is really good because, I think we're talking about, should the block length be 1,300 or should it be 600 or should it be somewhere in between? And so I think if we're focusing on what's the right rules for the city, and I like this idea of maybe it's by zone, because then we can eliminate the exceptions to the rule and establish some rules that we can enforce that make the city better. I know I currently live on the Canal Trail and we enjoy it. But we have a pretty big lot, so I guess we don't see it as big of a privacy issue. But I guess what I'm saying is, I think, let's not get hung up on the numbers that, 600 or even 1,300. Let's pick the right number for the city. And I like this idea of doing it by zone and then eliminating the exceptions. I think that's the biggest thing for me, is just if we can eliminate exceptions, it makes the process more clear and less of a fight every time we're doing a development.
I still contend that doing it just by zone is not granular enough. I think it needs to be by zone and by road type, by the purpose of the road. Is it a place that people live on? Or is this a neighborhood road, or is this a parkway road? Is this for transportation?
I would agree with that. So maybe that's something that we need to look at, Rob, is some form of, as well as even by zone, the commercial is, maybe the commercial blocks, we want to promote walkability. Maybe we want some of those to be smaller, to make sure that there's connections. So unfortunately, I don't think, it's one or two sizes fits all, if we're really trying to create some definitive tools that we can hold people accountable for. But
I'll be happy to put together some options for you relative to these. I think that's the very reason why we're having this discussion, is to hopefully get something that's workable.
So the only other thing I think on this, Rob, or I guess really commission, is, Rob had put something in there about some smaller street profiles to have connection between blocks. Is that something that we want to entertain? Is that something we want to stay away from? What, again, my opinion is, like, maybe in a commercial zone, that's kind of the same thing as what we talked about, those promenades might be, or something that, maybe it's not vehicle, but, then in some residential areas, would that be a way to accommodate an extended block length for some unique design or some topography issues? What's your guys' thoughts?
When I saw this in a particular ordinance, I thought, we've had multiple discussions about everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a considerable amount of resistance to these pedestrian walkways, but it sure seemed to have a nice thread to consider doing something that actually created a vehicular access point that it looks like a street. It's not going to be the kind of thing that people are going to be overly concerned about when it comes to having a 10 or 12-foot trail that goes along your side yard.
Again, in my opinion, I think, if it's my opinion, since nobody's talking, I would avoid them. Maybe in a commercial area, it's probably fine, but in a subdivision, my concern is if it looks like a street, it's going to be treated like a street. And so if it's only half a street, you know, you end up with somebody parking on it, you know, oh, it's not busy, they just park on it. We can have issues with snow plowing it, you know, and all of those things that we tend to say, well, we probably just need to make it size of a street then. And then we're back to chopping up the blocks. So again, but I'm thinking of it probably in larger lot scenarios that, you know, people are more driving in their vehicles. It's like, well, just drive around the block, you know, whatever that length is, but.
You know, I guess I guess I'm going to just reiterate my thoughts on it too, is that I would like to be able to require, when it's appropriate, that the developer include some kind of an access, whether that's a paved or a pedestrian walkway, or some kind of an access to, you know, the trails, the school, that we have some ability to enforce a requirement for them to include that in the plan.
I completely agree with that. And I even thought about that tonight when we talked about the ice place, right? I thought, you know what would make a sense of place here isn't just to put a wall up and make this cool thing, although I think that's great. I thought, oh, what if there was a walkway that connected it back over to Cafe Rio and Lee's and stuff, and that was the sense of place. But that obviously, I shut up about that because that obviously is the back of the building and a busy parking lot, and it just didn't work at all. But I mean, you know, we talked last meeting about what is a plaza and what is a sense of place and all that kind of stuff, and those walkways do make that, and it would be nice to have some teeth for that. So I think I disagree with Eric that they shouldn't exist, but I don't know how to enunciate it to where to what Commissioner Nancaro was saying, to where we can enforce them. I don't know what the balance is there, but I think
I guess
Commissioner Nancaro, go ahead.
When I say they shouldn't exist, mine is in the residential thing, just to connect two streets together. I agree with connecting a school, a city park, or a trail. And in commercial atmospheres, of course, you know, any connection we can get is probably beneficial. But it's how it's done. You know, you think, oh, that would be great. You know, I bet you probably could count on one hand how many people have walked from the Stump Park, Bicentennial Park, to Northern Ice on the sidewalk that's there. You know, you go down the street and turn the corner and come down and you're at Northern Ice. You seem like there's a connection there, but it's kind of removed as well. It's not really created. But so if there's a way to create it that helps that walkability, especially in the commercial atmosphere, I think that's great. But
I think there's still a place for it in residential. I think back to that. There's a development going in right now that abuts Canal Road, and it's down on the kind of the center of town, but far over to the east on Canal Road. And when I go along Canal Road there, like right almost where it gets to Mountain Road, there's this little stream that comes through, and there's a cul-de-sac or a you know, some kind of an elbow. And I just, every time I go running by there on Canal Road, I think, wouldn't that have been an awesome place to connect that development to the Canal Road? And that
to a
was
trail system.
To a trail system,
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the amenity, but it falls in the residential area also.
Yeah, no, I still, I think we're all in agreement that connecting the trails, you know, through that way, residential or otherwise, is yes. Again, I just go back to just to connect two streets together in the middle of a block, just because it's 800 feet to walk to the end. I don't see the reason for that.
Yeah.
So that's what it's.
If you guys remember when we talked about Pheasant Landing, I recused myself from the conversation because I was thinking about buying one of those lots. And as a consumer, as someone who wanted to live there, not as a city planner, but as somebody who thought he was going to be living across the street from it, I shut off my microphone and I was silently sitting here going, man, I hope they don't force that road there, because I thought it would be a road to nowhere. I thought someone's trailer is going to sit there. And so, yeah, I agree with that.
All right, well, Rob, do you have enough information for it from us, I think? Or is there anything else commissioners would like information to give Rob for him to, I guess, take this to the next
Well, Rob,
run around?
I've been critical of the block lengths by zone, but I actually like it. I just think there needs to be something in there that maybe either has by zone and road type, or just even some sentences there for exceptions are for this type of road type. Maybe, I hope that's, and maybe I'm not thinking of it all very clearly, but that's kind of where my head's at right now. Because I do think one day we're gonna have a parkway kind of a thing here that goes up Mountain Road and wraps around the top of the city, and I think that's gonna be used for transportation and not for to connect communities that are across the street from each other.
That may be what you have like in Salt Lake City up along the East Bench. Those roads along the East Bench from one place to another. There's a lot of roads connected to it.
Or maybe they do, maybe they do conform with those standards, and I'm crazy. I just, something when we had to enforce this on Mountain Road, I felt like we took the character of the road away, and I felt like North Ogden kind of lost something that day by having that bisect. And I thought it was, our hands were tied, and it was the right decision at the time. Actually, I think we recommended it not have it, and I think the city council overrode us, which I guess I'm trying to say I understand, but I don't know.
I'm confused. Are you talking about the road on Fruitland Drive or a road on Mountain Road?
Oh, that's right. Sorry, it was Fruitland Drive. You're right.
Okay, because I couldn't think of a Mountain Road when I knew the Fruitland Drive when it was said that's going to be a mistake, and we regret that sometime in the future we allowed that road to go in.
Yeah.
Well, it's.
Now, whoever does these minutes has to change all of what I just said.
Well,
So I guess so we can help Rob sort of narrow this down. In the language that he provided, there's a section that's on the screen right now that talks about accessway routing. The routing language I like. The design, if I guess what I'm hearing you guys is it doesn't have to be a paved surface necessarily, like a road. It could be a walkway, it could be a bike path, it could be, I don't know, maybe more, more leeway or,
I think the surface of it,
that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the surface of it, if our intent down the road is to have all our trail systems paved, then we just have it be a hard surface, paved or concrete. We had one of the residents, I can't remember if it was this meeting or the general plan meeting, who lives over there at Mystery Meadows along the trail that's just gravel. And one day they hope to pave that. The trail's being required to be gravel from in other areas, be paved. But it tends to at least be cleaner if it's required to be a hard surface rather than gravel. But if it is a rural connection to, another gravel trail, maybe it's that. But I guess if it's in a new development, my opinion would be is just required to be paved or some hard surface, just for probably aesthetics, weed control, and those types of things. But
Is there anything else that we can provide to Rob to help him? I feel like we've kind of left him with this big pile of unknown right now.
Well, I think in summary, and maybe after let's talk about it, but we're good with requiring connectivity, to a trailway, this access way routing to trails, parks, schools, those types of things. Then having the block lengths maybe by zone / road type. And then we can kind of narrow down what we feel like maybe those distances need to be, but we're currently at 1,300. I think in larger lot zones, 12.5 and above, that's probably fine. Then you know, the initial stuff, the meat of it, the purpose, why we want to have, you know, following a traffic plan or our transportation plan, you know, abiding with that definitely makes sense to give that. The issues with the engineer having the ability to make adjustments because of existing conditions or topography. The street intersections being 200 feet from 400, we seemed fine with that. So I don't know, does that seem like it summarized what we talked about?
Yeah, it does. I think that's maybe a little clearer. Thanks.
The idea of this discussion was just to have that, a discussion that started moving in the direction of, oh, here's some basic principles that we feel are important to consider. And I have a lot of that. I just remind the Planning Commission that we're planning for a city that is not just for subdividers and for people to make it convenient for them, but we're looking at this from the long run. And that what kind of neighborhoods are we going to end up with in the future? When you look at our existing standards, you look around and you say, gee, how pedestrian friendly are some of these subdivisions? Well, you kind of make a question about that. But if that's the direction that you all want to go for the community, then that's where we'll end up. So thanks.
Okay.
I'll keep plugging away on this one.
All right. Thanks, Rob.
Sure.
Let's go on to our next item. Our continued item number 9, continued discussion regarding the mixed use town centers. Evan?
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be back with you. We just wanted to have this item on the agenda to give the Planning Commission a chance to talk a little bit further about mixed use development. If you remember last time, we did some videos and some picture presentations. We highlighted a few different communities in Utah: Sugar House, Brigham City, Bountiful, and we kind of finished off talking a little bit about Holiday City and the recent development that they've done in Holiday. I don't know, did any of you get a chance to watch that video after the fact that we sent out? No, that's okay. That's okay, there's still time.
Well, on this, as we talk about mixed use, I was absent in the last meeting, so I've just been playing a little bit of catch up. But Don, were you at this one in this discussion?
Yes.
I guess what I'm getting at is currently the general plan steering committee is having these same discussions, and which they're putting stuff together to bring before us to recommend what they would like to see the general plan go towards. And my only concern is, are we premature in discussing this, knowing that it's going to be coming back before us from the general plan steering committee? Or what's your thoughts, Don? Because I know you're on that committee as well.
Yeah, there's, I think with what's going on with the general plan steering committee, this is the discussion needs to be had there in that committee. And it is to some degree already going on. So yeah, there's some redundancy here.
Yeah, I just feel like if this is going to come before us in the next couple of months from them, do we want to, get down to the nuts and bolts of it now and have our minds decided, and then all of a sudden be presented from that committee of, their recommendations of what we do?
Right.
I don't know if it's me. It feels like this whole mixed use conversation circles around, is in the steady circle that we keep, if it wasn't discussed in form-based code, then it was discussed in other options. And then So
Yeah.
we're in a desperate search of identity, I feel like, with the mixed use. But so I guess that's the question to the commission, knowing that the general plan steering committee is having these discussions. I hate to, cut off what Evan has prepared and wants to discuss, but is that something we feel like maybe that needs to be discussed and presented with them prior to us having long discussions and conversations about it?
So
I
commissioners,
didn't mind looking at the pictures and that, have an idea what may be coming. But I'd like to hear what the steering committee's coming up with, or what their look is at, because they have much more time looking a lot of detail. Then present that does with their thinking and what their direction is.
so commissioners, staff was interested in not having you make any conclusions with respect to this, but this is more of an educational opportunity to be able to be exposed to various principles that are associated with mixed use.
Okay. And maybe to me, I'm going back too far. Commissioners, you'll have to speak up, because I feel like I'm going back as far as when we did field trips to Bountiful and other places talking about mixed use and the whole gamut of it through the form-based code. Do we have an understanding at this point, kind of what options there would be there, or what?
And yeah, part of what Evan was showing was they were Bountiful was one that we did the field trip last time we were working on it. Midvale, was it Midvale? I don't know. One of those places in Salt Lake. We hit a couple of them. There's 9th and 9th and a couple other places where we were looking at that in terms of mixed use. And this is the same thing. And I'm still confused where the Brigham City comes into mixed use. There's no mixed use there. That's all commercial.
Right.
At least the main street. I'm still trying to get, I drove up and down the road a couple times last week trying to figure out what was mixed use on there, and there's nothing mixed. It's all commercial on Main Street. So I was confused by that too. But yeah, I know, and like you, Eric, I've been through this before, so I think it's good education, but I think it probably should be presented to, I'm wondering if this would be really well had with General Plan Steering Committee as they're trying to reformulate or make suggestions and possible changes to the general plan.
I agree. I feel like we keep going in circles. And I'd like to hear what they have, so maybe we can stop the circles.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation tonight, is really have this passed to the General Plan Steering Committee, let these questions be answered of what their recommendation is. And then as it comes to us, we can continue the conversation, see what their recommendations were to some of these questions. How many stories would be appropriate, locations, all of these different things. And then we have that discussion and know as we're educated, because they'll be recommending some adjustments to the general plan. It seems the mixed use that we've have in North Ogden, or any proposals, have been more of the horizontal nature, not the vertical. Meaning a site would have residential and commercial all within the same site, but not like these pictures that we've seen that are stacked. And hopefully maybe that's what we get in more of a downtown setting in North Ogden. But
Yeah, I thought the last meeting when Evan covered this, it was really interesting, to kind of go back. Now some of us went on all those field trips where we went to Daybreak, and we did go to, I think, somewhere in Holiday or something like that. And it was great. It was actually very valuable to go look at some of those things. So, I know that there are a couple of new commissioners, but also I think the discussion the last time was when we were doing all those field trips in the context of form-based code, we were looking at a citywide vision where last week, last meeting, we were kind of focusing on where would be maybe more appropriate pockets to do this, perhaps on a smaller scale. And I think that may be where the steering committee is looking at these things, but I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that, Don.
Well, when we left the form-based code, when we voted it down, that's where we ended at looking at pockets. And that's where it stopped. And now we're back to the pockets, which is
And I
good.
think, yeah, and I do think this mixed use concept, kind of like those field trips and some of these pictures that are in Evan's presentation, I think would be great for some of those pockets. And but I do agree that, you know, if this is something that the steering committee is looking at, unless they need our input for something on that, maybe we should let that process play out.
Well, I drive down Washington. I think I won't even be alive when this stuff happens. It's so far down the road.
Are you in poor health, Scott? What? Come on, have some faith.
No, it's just I have to keep remind myself this is long range thinking. This isn't a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year thing. This is very long range. So there's a lot of stuff along Washington. There are good businesses that are going to have to be replaced.
I disagree with that, Mr. Commissioner Barker, because all it takes is one application from someone who wants to build in this style. And I feel like we need to have an ordinance that will support it, right? I mean, we don't know what somebody would want to build. If somebody wants to build an ice cream shop with a condo on top, you know, that's mixed use.
But you got some good businesses along there doing fairly well that should have to be displaced. And I don't think that'd be fair to them.
Well, no, it's more our areas like the property of 26 or 2700 in Washington that's undeveloped there by O'Reilly's, and some of the undeveloped area, you know, that obviously is going to get developed before any relocation or demolition of other businesses happen. But, you know, like Commissioner Mason said, it may happen sooner than we think. We need to be educated and have a plan for it. But my only reason I brought that up when I did is simply I know the general plan is working, steering committee is working on this, and I hate to be premature in us having a lot of discussion and decisions made before then they come back and all of a sudden now we're talking about it again in 3 months.
I also remember the person wanted to Cooperstown. I think it's Cooperstown south of the theater. Wasn't able to find any businesses that wanted even to come into there. He couldn't find any. They all turned him down. So, you know, got to find a way to get business who want to be part of it.
Yeah, and it is long-range planning, and we need to be thinking of that. But yeah, short term right now, the area just north of the theaters, there's that little partial block, and that was zone mixed use, and they abandoned the mixed use and just put in condos. We had that. We ran that one through about a year ago.
Well, commissioners, what my recommendation would be that we, you know, pass this discussion if possible. Maybe Evan can present to the general plan steering committee. And so that discussion can be a little bit more in depth at that level. And then we bring this back up when it's ready, when they bring it before us.
Before we completely table this, Evan, can I ask you, were there broad points in there that we were missing? You know, without getting into the details of your presentation you prepared. I know we got through 3/4 of it or so last time. And I just don't know what the subject headings would have been. I just want to know what I'm missing here if we do this.
Sure. So I didn't actually have an all-out presentation tonight. It was more of a discussion, but the part that you didn't see related to Holiday City, it's about a 15-minute video that has their community development director speaking and showing some before and after pictures of the development of their Holiday Village Center. And what I think is particularly valuable about that story is they basically took a small stretch of their main street, which was kind of a no name, no place strip mall sort of, outdated development. And they turned it into a pretty desirable center of activity. And they did that using, the city obviously played a critical role in making that happen. It wouldn't have happened by just leaving it to the private sector. And so the city stepped in and made something pretty unique and special, which created a place that people want to be. It created some energy for the commercial activity. It created some business opportunities. They have office space there as well. And so when you look at what it was before compared to what it is now, it's pretty significant what they've done and the ways that they've changed it. And their development continues. They're not totally finished, but the heart of what they were trying to do is in place and complete. And so I think there are just a lot of pretty good lessons that can be learned from their experience. And I think it's pretty neat to see what they created out of what they started with. So it's a worthwhile story to learn about. And obviously North Ogden City is a different place, different situation, but I think there are a lot of similarities. We're not going to build a new downtown Ogden, and Holiday was not going to build a new downtown Salt Lake City, but they took what they had and they really maximized their resources, I guess, and the opportunity to make something that really fit well and improved the whole situation and the setting for what they were doing. So anyway, that's just kind of a highlight.
Okay, thank you. Well, commissioners, what do you feel? Any other discussion? Brandon, did that answer kind of what your question was, or did we lose you?
Yeah, no, you didn't lose me. I'm holding comment because I don't want to go against the will of the rest of the commission. So I'm fine.
Well, if the commission is good, I would recommend that this gets talked about with the general plan steering committee, and then as they propose with us, we can continue the conversation then and pick it up. What's the
I agree with
consensus?
that.
Good with that.
Okay.
I agree.
Well, Evan, would you be able to make a presentation to the general plan steering committee?
I'd be happy to, sure.
So I don't know, I guess if you, Lynn, if you wouldn't mind maybe connecting Grant and
Stephanie,
maybe with Evan, and then they can get him on the maybe the next agenda or when he could present.
Okay, yep, I'll do that.
All right, well, thank you. I guess that takes us on to remarks to planning commissioners. Any remarks from commissioners?
No.
Nope.
All right, report from our city planner, Rob.
I have one thing to report, and that is that Brandon Bell's daughter is a volleyball player, and they are going to the district championship.
Well, good for her.
Is that game tomorrow night at Fremont by chance?
It happened tonight.
Oh, okay.
I think it's a middle school or junior high school.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool.
Okay, nothing else?
Not for me.
John, how about you?
Nothing too big, but so you know, 7-Eleven will be on the council agenda next week with some revisions they are proposing that they've worked on to try and accommodate some of the concerns the council raised. Cooperstown is likely set to come back as well. And then there'll also be in your near future some discussion about what's called the North Hills project, which is, we've always called it the North Cove, or you know, the property north of the cove, but that'll be coming soon. Just wanted you to know that's on its way. And then just to reiterate, you know, I'm glad for these discussions we can have, and I hope no one takes offense, you know, if anyone's expressing opinions, because what we're trying to do is hash out the extremes of all the discussion points so that we can pick the solutions that are best for the city. And I really appreciate working with this group and being willing to have those type of conversations, because I think it's really resulted in some great things for the city.
I would agree. It is always good.
Hey, John, on those nights when things are before the city council, Tuesday nights are always hard for me. I have other commitments on Tuesday that I can't control. And, but however, I'm always willing to field a phone call, you know, if there was a specific question or anything. So just make that known to the city council that I know it'd be a little odd for them to make a phone call in the middle of their meeting, but
okay,
if they ever needed to, right, then I'd be happy to do that.
No, I'm sure they appreciate that option, because they, you know, a lot of them do watch your meetings. Even if they don't watch them in person, they'll go through and watch the stuff to see what's going on and make sure that they know why the commission has voted the way they did. So but that's very helpful. That's all I've got.
All right. Thanks, John. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, you
Any
guys.
opposed? Did you oppose, Brandon?
No, I'm an aye.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Good night,
Thank
all.
you.
Thanks.
Aye.
Have
Thank
fun.
you. See ya.